get for the record, because the commissioner probably know, but to make our record, you just tell us what is that organization, please?
It's a national organization. We support liquor law enforcement agencies across the United States. We provide information, we provide training in various aspects of liquor law enforcement. We facilitate the sharing of information between agencies. That's basically what we do.
Does your organization also either perform and or publish research?
We do, yes, sir.
And provide that to your member organizations?
We do. Part of our service to our membership is conducting research and providing the results of that research to our members.
Your day-to-day work, the work that you do on a non-volunteer basis, is as a sworn officer of the Pennsylvania State Patrol?
Yes, sir. I've been a member of the state police for 27 years and engaged in liquor enforcement for 14 of those 27 years.
All right. And just for a touch of frame of reference for your personal work, in Pennsylvania, is liquor sold through licensees who are in private business?
No, sir. Pennsylvania is one of the control states.
All right. And the national organization, is your position as president a volunteer position, or is that an unpaid position?
Yes, sir. Very much so.
You volunteered to run for it, you got elected to it, I would guess.
Yes, sir.
All right. Can you tell us, in terms of the responsibilities of the national organization of which you are president, what is it about liquor law enforcement that is unique and requires that there be education on that specific subject for law enforcement people?
Well, in particular, what we find is the knowledge of liquor laws generally across the nation, as far as law enforcement, other types of law enforcement, your local enforcement, your state enforcement is usually lacking. There's a lack of knowledge as far as the statutes. The liquor laws themselves, when it comes to the enforcement of them, there are some challenges. In a lot of jurisdictions, officers move in and out of the agencies, and it's very difficult to obtain an expertise in the enforcement of liquor laws in a short period of time, because it's so different from the day-to-day operations of other law enforcement agencies. In a state police agency or local police agencies where you're dealing with victims and witnesses and suspects, and you move into regulating what is a legal substance, and you're dealing with businesses and you're dealing with customers, and from time to time you still deal with the other aspects that cross over from the criminal element into the operation of licensees.
And in that answer, when you use the term criminal element, Mr. Jones, was your reference to non-alcohol acts in violations constituting crimes? Is that what you meant? It sounded like that.
Well, sir, it depends on the jurisdiction. In some jurisdictions, the liquor law enforcement officers are limited law enforcement officers, and their enforcement power is limited as such. And when I speak of some of the criminal activity, it's a very broad term. In a lot of jurisdictions, certain violations of the liquor laws are criminal in nature as well as administrative. And you also have various types of criminal activities that we find often associated with liquor license establishments, such as gambling and things of that nature.
Now, I want to ask you about a concept we heard about earlier. In liquor law enforcement and in the work of your national organization, do you find yourself focusing on the need to promote and encourage collaboration between or among law enforcement agencies?
Yes, sir. One of our current initiatives, as a matter of fact, deals with that exact topic, and it's the term we use is place of last drink, and the collection of that data and promoting that with law enforcement in the field to actively collect that data and share it with liquor law enforcement and licensing authorities in an effort to identify possible problem establishments.
I'm going to see if I can understand that answer thoroughly as someone who's a novice in what you do professionally. Do you mean that you try to identify the specific location or vendor at which the last drink preceding an arrest was sold?
Yes, sir, and I apologize for being
No, that's
a little
okay.
bit vague.
You probably weren't. It was probably me.
I can let you know, we understand because we deal with it.
Yeah.
Ms. Johnson might not.
And I may be the only one who needed the clarification, and I appreciate it. And so tell us just briefly, why is that of interest, the place of last drink?
Well, again, in most every jurisdiction, the liquor enforcement agencies are very much understaffed. They have a unique challenge in the number of establishments that each, if you broke it down per individual officer, what they would be responsible for. The last time the association did a survey, the average was between 200 and 250 establishments per officer, and in many jurisdictions, the numbers are much more daunting. Given that fact and the limited resources and the overwhelming number of establishments that they're responsible for, it's very important to be able to focus those very limited resources where they need to be. And the information stemming from that place of last drink, where law enforcement has an interaction with an individual, where the underlying criminal activity had some root in the person's level of intoxication, questioning that person or using some of the means to try to identify where that last drink occurred is advantageous to liquor enforcement agencies or alcohol enforcement agencies in identifying possible problem establishments.
Is this a presentation in this particular area of economic activity of what seems to be recurrent in human behavior, that 20% are responsible for 80% and that kind of thing, or 90 and 10, whatever it may be?
Yes, sir. I myself frequently use the phrase we spend 95% of our time on 5% of our establishments.
Because you find that those 5% tend to be places of last drink.
That's one way of identifying. We also, a lot of different agencies, licensing and enforcement, encourage or actively seek information from local and state police agencies on, for instance, on information such as calls of service at a location or calls of service that can be tied to the operation of the location. And again, when we speak about liquor laws across the country, it's hard to speak in real specific terms because it varies so greatly from jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
Mr. Jones, in your organization's work, do you deal with multi-jurisdictional and multi-agency interaction issues? Perhaps less politely sometimes called turf wars?
To some extent we do. The unique position that we're usually in alcohol enforcement is that nobody really wants to do what we do. So, we don't have a lot of the turf war issues as far as somebody trying to come in and do our job for us.
You've been present throughout the hearing today, have you not?
Yes, sir.
And you were here, of course, at the request of the protesters, but as a volunteer today?
Yes, sir.
And your exposure to this issue, Mr. Jones, is principally limited to what you have heard today?
Yes, sir, other than just reading a newspaper article ahead of time just to try to familiarize myself with the situation.
Well, then I think the fairest thing for me to ask you is this. Based on what you've heard today and your professional history and your education and your training and experience, what is it that you want this commission to know that you can bring to it?
Just a second. I'm going to object on foundation. Started out like a question asking for an opinion. So if there's an opinion, yes, I'm objecting on foundation and relevance.
Mr. Allen?
No argument. I want this man to be able to just share with the commission what he thinks should be said and not miss it with 4 questions and not prolong it with 4 questions.
Okay, I'm going to allow the answer, but I'm going to reserve the objection. He is his position, he would be able to opine, but I want to see what the opinion is and maybe ask an inquiry as to what he actually knows of Nebraska law and Nebraska resources on enforcement. Go ahead.
You asked the question again,
It's
specifically what?
really as simple as this. Based on what you've heard today and on all you know about what you do, are there things you want the commission to hear from you as the president of your organization?
Well, as the president of the National Liquor Enforcement Association, of course, our primary goal is the enforcement of whatever alcohol laws exist in a jurisdiction to mitigate the negative effects that alcohol has on society. And we really focus and we burrow down to the communities where licensees exist and their effect that they have on the quality of life of the communities in which they exist. And that's really our focus. And my being here today isn't really to take sides with either side, but just to go on record saying from an alcohol enforcement standpoint, that's our goal. And a portion of that, of course, involves public safety to the extent that the enforcement of the laws that protect our public, to the extent that would go into the public safety realm. Establishments, the effect an establishment has on a community goes well beyond what actually occurs on the licensed premise. In many jurisdictions, the effects on the community are taken into account by enforcement personnel as far as the identification of problem establishments and the actions they take, and also taken into account with licensing authorities when it comes, such as this, when it comes to renewing or issuing licenses. The one element that is crucial, and this is sort of to repeat what I said earlier, is the ability to focus what are in most cases very limited resources, and that ability really comes from, in many cases, information from local law enforcement that is passed on to alcohol licensing and enforcement authorities to, again, allow them to focus that. And without that information coming from those areas, it's very difficult to identify those locations and focus those limited resources where they need to be.
I'm going to go over the objection. I mean, his mission statement is very clear, and with the commission's mission statement in law enforcement to enforce liquor laws for public health, safety, and welfare. So he's not making a particular comment, and furthermore, in accordance with the Nebraska Liquor Control Act, which allows us to work with local law enforcement to help enforce the act. So I mean, just generally, I think he stated what our mission statement is. Our objection.
Members of the commission, Mr. Rupi,
It's Mr. Root.
Mr. Rupi, sorry.
It's all right. Trust me, not the first time I made it. Usually they script it personally.
Well, I can probably do that too. I really wanted this gentleman to be here so you could ask some questions if you wanted to, and I have no more questions.
In cross-examination, Mr. Schneider.
This is Lieutenant. Is it Lieutenant?
Yes.
You work in Pennsylvania and you're a law enforcement officer there, correct?
Yes.
And as Mr. Domina established, you're the president of this, the National Liquor Law Enforcement Association.
Yes.
Is it all right if I just call that association instead of?
Yes.
No, understand, okay. And you became a member of that association in July of 13?
I joined the board in July 13th. I was a member prior to that.
Okay. And from what I can tell, that association seeks members. I don't know if they're individual members or they're departmental members, so can you clarify that for me?
We have both individual and agency membership.
And do you have any agency members in Nebraska?
I don't believe we do. I don't know particularly. Could be the answer.
Do you have you had any interaction with the Sheridan County Sheriff's Office?
I personally have not had any interaction.
Have you had any interaction with by you, I'm saying the association, so let me re-ask that. Has the association had any interaction with the Sheridan County Sheriff's Office?
To my knowledge.
Has the association had any interaction with the Nebraska State Patrol, particularly about the issue in White Club?
I can't say for certain. If I may, Paul, we're involved in training of officers from across the country. I am involved personally. We conduct, we used to term it an academy, but now we call it a law enforcement symposium. We have officers from all over the country. So specifically, I have no knowledge, but it's possible that we have an attendee at one of our trainings.
Certainly, you personally don't claim any specialty about issues in White Clay
No, sir.
or on the Pine Ridge Reservation.
I do not.
And it sounds like your interaction has been limited to reading a few newspaper articles.
Yes, sir, just to familiarize myself with the situation.
I don't have anything else.
Briefly, have you spoken to any members of the Nebraska State Patrol Liquor Division?
Just this morning, sir.
Now, are you aware that there is a division of Nebraska State Patrol of approximately 10 full-time investigators who are assigned to the commission for commission activities?
I was aware that, I believe there was one per troop and a coordinator, but I knew the number.
There's a couple other ones, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's how the funding was worked. And I will agree that liquor enforcement needs more funding. I get argued all the time, but swallow it up here. And you're also aware, as you stated, that Pennsylvania and Nebraska are quite different, and that Pennsylvania is a control state where Nebraska is a licensing state.
Yes, sir.
I love the 21st Amendment, correct?
Yes, sir.
I have no further questions. Any questions from the commissioner?
Thank you very much. May this witness speak?
Yes, you're excused, so thank you for coming in all the way. And by the way, Nebraska used to be very involved in the association. Sergeant Costello used to be the head of our division, was on the board for many years.
So, yeah, I just haven't had an interaction with you.
We'll talk to Lonnie over there, try to get it to come.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Any other